G'day, I'm Patrick from Douglas Fir Design. Welcome to the Router Bits. I want to introduce you to my latest woodworking machine. It's a Sailrite LSZ1. It's actually a sewing machine. It's not mine. It's not for woodworking, but I do need to put it into a table for a craftsman friend of mine. And these machines come in a little wooden box, and I'm going to try and duplicate that cutout, and it's got a beautiful little rebate, and I need to put that into this big 30mm plywood table so we can build a proper sewing machine table rather than this portable little box. Now, you might not have an industrial sewing machine that you need to build into a table, but don't go away, because these processes that I'm showing you'll find really useful for other projects. We're going to be using a rebate set, a slot cutting bit, a dovetail bit, and a roundover bit to do a bunch of little jobs that I use on lots of other projects around the shop. This one just happens to kind of bring them all together, and it was something that I have to do at the moment. So I've been puzzling for a while about how to do these really nice, clean, large radius curves that I need to cut out. One way obviously would be to use just a small trimming or pattern following bit, but then I'd need to have a pattern that had that 50mm radius curve already set in it, and I didn't have anything that would match that perfectly cleanly. So what I actually came up with was, rather than using a pattern that had the 50mm radius, I'm actually going to use a really large router bit which actually has a 50mm radius. I'm going to use this slot cutting set from Torcata, which, like I said, from tooth to tooth is about 50mm in diameter, sorry, not radius. And what that will allow me to do is use a square template to get those nice rounded edges. Because it's such a large bit, it's not going to cut right into those corners and will leave me with this really gentle radius that I'm after. So the first thing obviously that I need to do is mark out exactly where I wanted this hole to be. And I marked that out on the top side, and then most of the work that I'm going to be doing is actually going to occur from the underside. So then I remarked it on the underside and cut that out just by drilling a couple holes and then using a jigsaw to rough cut that hole out a few millimeters in from that line that I ultimately want to be my really clean line. So as I mentioned, I am using a 50mm slot cutter because I want that size as my internal corners. You could use any large router bit that had a nice square edge. This morticing bit would do the same job, but the internal radius of that corner would match this smaller 30mm morticing bit rather than this larger bit. Now this one just happens to be the one that suits the size that I want, so that is what I'm going to use. In terms of setting up these fences, what you actually need to find out is the distance from the teeth to the edge of your router base plate, because it's the base plate that's going to run up against these fences, not the bearing here. So I've measured that out, I've marked that in relation to this hole that I want to cut out, and I'm just going to tack these down, which is why we're working from the underside of our piece, so I'm not marring up the top side with tack holes everywhere. I'm going to check that it's square, tack it down, and then I'll be able to do my first pass with the router, which will just give me a clean lip the whole way around, and then I'll be using that afterwards to follow that through with a pattern following bit so that the bearing can actually sit in this really nice groove that I've cut using the slot cutter. So this 50mm slot cutting bit did a fantastic job at giving me those nice gentle corners that I was looking for. It's a really handy technique because I didn't want to make a whole bunch of really nicely curved templates. Like I said, you could use any bit. This is a giant panel raising bit. If you were careful, you could actually use this to get a 80 or 90 mil radius corner as well. You just need to obviously set it up so that you are just trimming with the edge of the blade. You can't plunge with these, of course, because they have bearings on the bottom, so you have to remove all of that material. Try not to use these, or any of these bits really, to do a ton of cutting work. You're just creating this nice clean lip that you can then use a pattern following or a trimming bit to clean up later on. Now I'm just going to use a pattern following bit to clean up the rest of this material, so I can go the full 30 mil of this stock. If I wanted to, and all I had was a flush trimming bit, I could flip this around now and use the flush trimming bit with the bearing on the bottom, but this is what I'm going to do. The next step in this great adventure is creating this nice little rebate all the way around that the plate of the sewing machine sits into. Now this one is about 8mm deep and it's a little under 10 mil across. I'm going to go 8 by 10 for my rebate. I've checked that against the thing that I'm working with and it'll work perfectly. And so I'm going to use this fantastic little rebate set. So you've got a great big rebate cutter and a whole number of bearings. And what this allows you to do is swap these bearings out to get the exact depth of rebate that you're after. So I've put the second bearing onto this cutter, which is going to allow me to get a 10 mil cut in width, and the depth is going to be set obviously by changing the depth on my handheld router. So these different wheels, different bearings allow you to get multiple different rebate depths. Really handy little set. It's by Torcata. It's such a good one to have in the shop because rather than having 6 or 7 different rebate bits, you can have this one set sitting there, takes less space. It's going to be less costly than buying all of the rebate bits, and it gives you the options that you need for a little project like this. So I flipped this table over because I actually want the rebate on the top side now, and as I have no need to nail fences onto this anymore, I can work from my top side. I've placed the rebate bit inside the router. Even though I do want eventually an 8mm depth of rebate the whole way around, I'm going to do it in 2 passes, so 4 and 4. That'll give me a cleaner cut and it'll also just make it a bit neater. That's just a bit easier. So this one I've measured at 4mm, and then I'll measure the next one at 8mm, and that will be our rebate done. So now that I've cut my rebate, there's just a few little details that I need to do which are actually specific to this sewing machine and this particular fit. I need to cut out these little notches here, here and here for some structural elements of the sewing machine to fit down in there. And I'm going to flip the router bit back to the pattern following bit, and what that's going to allow me to do is in these little locations I can actually bring the bearing to the depth of the top of my rebate to cut away some of that material underneath. Now I'm not going to set up fences, I'm just going to do it by eye because these are going to be underneath the table anyway. There's plenty of supporting material here to hold the weight of the machine, so I've just got to make sure I leave enough space here for these supporting elements. I have 3 of these to do, and I'm going to flip the bit over now and get started on that. machine fits in pretty nicely. It looks like the radius of those corners on the base could have been slightly tighter, so maybe 40mm rather than 50, but that would just be a matter of choosing a slightly smaller router bit for our initial step that we did. But other than that, fits in really nicely. I need to add a nice chamfer to the front edge of this industrial sewing machine table. Pretty standard feature on industrial sewing tables like this. Often there's a strip of measuring tape along the front, and having that chamfer allows you to see it more easily. But it's also a pretty common feature on furniture like dining tables or coffee tables. To create this bevel on the front edge of the sewing machine table, I'm going to use a chamfer bit with a bearing. And so I'm going to set this so that the bearing is still touching the bottom edge of this 30mm chunk of ply, and that will be what guides this bit in the handheld router. And I should just be able to do it in one pass, get one nice clean chamfer all the way along. I've chosen this bit because I think the angle is going to be appropriate, but you could choose a much greater bit, like something with a greater angle, like 45 instead of this. I think it's a 22 possibly. You could also do this as an effect like a shark bite to have it on the underside of the table. So in that case, you'd be working from underneath the table, whereas I want the chamfer facing up, so I'm working from the top. Last thing I need to do to this table is just put a slight round over on the 3 remaining edges that don't have a chamfer on it. Just using a little round over bit in my trimming router. Dead simple, nothing terribly fancy about it.